this could be the most important MLS season in the history of the Vancouver Whitecaps for many, many reasons. And naturally, because of how much this club means to you and Ben, and to me as well, we'll start with the Whitecaps, who are in a very precarious situation, I would say, because they're coming off their best on-field season ever. They have one of the most marketable players in North American sports, let alone in North American soccer, in Thomas Müller. And yet all of the uncertainty surrounding this team, and I think some of the personnel changes that have happened around Thomas Müller, with uncertainty about Ryan Gall's health and an aging Brian White, I don't think that this Vancouver Whitecaps team can match what they did last season. So I don't particularly know what 2026 might look like for this team.
Well, it's split because if anything, I would argue, I think maybe you're right in the sense, I don't know if they'll be able to replicate what they did last year because somehow their schedule gets harder this year. They have the exact same commitments, but then they play, they're going to have issues of playing games at home during the World Cup, which is going to break up their season and condense it even more. And they're in Leagues Cup this year. Last year they were just CONCACAF, MLS, Can Champ. This year they're in all those 3+ Leagues Cup. So I think they'll be hard pressed to replicate being within touching distance of every trophy like they were. At the same time, in a one-off game, this version of the Whitecaps is just as good and maybe even better, depending on the way you look at it. Obviously, they retain Yohei Takaoka. That's a big plus. Tristan Blackman's back, despite the rumors that circled his head. You get a full year of Ralph Priso at center back, which appears, based on the playoffs, that's an upgrade they've gotten out of nowhere at center back. Their fullbacks are back. Maybe we'll even get to see a healthy Sam Adekugbe. Don't forget about him if he can stay on the pitch. In the midfield, you've kept Sebastian Berhalter, which we know how good he was last year. You move up the pitch, we're getting a first full year of Thomas Müller, which, he's rested now. He's not coming in halfway through a season. Then you look at the rest of the roster. Yes, you lose Ali Ahmed and Jaden Nelson. Those are two big losses because they haven't replaced the profile. But you get a full year of Kenji Cabrera. I really like the Cher Sabali and Bruno Caicedo signings. Connor Laraz is a tidy depth piece. AZ Jackson is a good piece. Like, you look at this team, I think on paper they're right there, even a bit better than last year, but there's going to be questions of how they handle that condensed season. And Brendan, you mentioned it, there are some older legs on the team and that could catch up. So the way I'm kind of looking at it, this feels like a team that might take a slight step back in the regular season, but I think in all the competitions that they're into, you should expect them to push and make deep runs in at least 2 out of 3 of them, if not all of them.
I think that despite all the uncertainty off the pitch, what last season proved and what I'm expecting this season from the operations of the actual team, because Jesper Sorensen very much seems like a person that is not concerned with, doesn't get swept up in any of the drama that he can't control, and the things above him and the things that are not solidified, the speculation, the drama, the fear, and all that. He seems like someone that's very capable of putting that on a shelf and not letting it bother or affect what he's doing his day to day. He'll deal with it if it, when it's right in his face and it's actually affecting his day to day. And I think the team will embody that. And I also think, as we saw last season, this team is going to change and evolve throughout the year. And that's kind of been a pattern the last few years for the Whitecaps, where the team that finishes the season does look very different than the team that started. There's quite a few new faces. They do seem still capable of adapting, and they seem to get more decisions right than they get wrong. At least last season they did. I love the addition of Kenji Cabrera. I think he's someone who could really step into a star place and really have a breakout season, maybe even in the same way that Sebastian Berhalter did last year. Keeping him was immense. Keeping Tristan Blackman, as you said, is incredible, because it really did seem like he was leaving, and anytime Inter Miami really want a player, you would just assume that player would want that Inter Miami situation. But Tristan Blackman is still here, seems very committed in preseason. He's always someone whose effort, wins you over, and is never afraid to get stuck in. He's a beloved fan favorite in Vancouver for a reason. And with Ralph Priso next to him, as you say, and the unexpected new center back pairing, I think defensively they're very good. I also think offensively, losing Ali Ahmed, I really think they're gonna feel it.
So good.
He was fantastic, and they did have other options. Emmanuel Sabi, I thought, really improved as the season went on. Obviously, he became a starter and almost undroppable. And if he takes another step forward, they'll be even more dangerous offensively. I do like some of the additions. I do like that Cherokee addition as well. I think will be great up front. But they've lost the depth in Jaden Nelson. I think I'm just worried to see them change at the point where I feel it'll be harder for them to match the start of last season. And the World Cup break is going to have a big impact. But to kind of tie up my long ramble here, I do think you'll see some other faces. And I wouldn't be surprised if there are some friends of Thomas Müller, and I don't mean Robert Lewandowski. That would be amazing. But I would not be surprised if there's some friends of Thomas Müller who join at some point this season after the World Cup. And I think that would completely change the dynamic of the team and the situation and the outlook for Vancouver.
Well, it's in. We know the Whitecaps will change for whatever reason. Mid-season acquisitions, they made a habit of it. Muller last year, Stuart Armstrong the year before. Once upon a time, Ryan Gauld was a mid-season. Andres Kubas. They tend to get their DPs. They tend to get their big players in the mid-season. There's some room for flexibility on this roster. To their credit, despite what they've done, there are levers to pull to improve. But just the one thing that I think really stands out with the Whitecaps, Brendan, you mentioned their secret weapon. You mentioned it, but you didn't maybe dive into it. It's not Thomas Müller, which you would think because he's obviously a player that elevates those around him, but it's Jesper Sorensen. I think he's really going to be the difference maker because he was last year. Remember what we were saying about the Whitecaps last year? They'd lost Armstrong. On paper, they looked worse. And then you come in and bring a manager that just elevates everyone. And it made a world of difference. All of a sudden, guys like Sebastian Berhalter go from serviceable MLS player to best 11, Tristan Blackman, etc. I think that's the most reassuring thing is that with Jesper Sorensen, he's got a good mix as a manager where his principles are very important. You know how he's going to play. His team's going to hold the ball. They're going to be aggressive. They're going to press. But he showed last year with different formations, different personnel, an injury list that would have destroyed past iterations of the Whitecaps, might have, turned them into a non-playoff team. And the system always stays the same and the players within it always have their role. So that's why on one hand, you see Ali Ahmed and Jaden Nelson and you go, man, that's a lot of speed loss. That's a lot of talent. That's a lot of skill. But I'm sure Jesper Sorensen's looking at a slower version of this team and he's thinking, all right, well, I'll adjust. Maybe, you're not getting as much natural width from your wingers and they're going to play more like 10s, but then that maybe means the fullbacks are going to be more aggressive. Maybe this means a bigger offensive role for AJ Ocampo and Tate Johnson and Sam Adekugbe when healthy. That's what I like about Sorensen, that he sees problems and immediately he identifies solutions, because sometimes in MLS with managers with really rigid systems, you see it anytime a big player, a key player that's really the heartbeat of a system goes down, they falter. But based on Jesper Sorensen's last year, there's no player that they could lose other than maybe Seb Berhalter that would really, you could lose Muller for a month or Gauld as they did for months, and it feels like it wouldn't be the end as it would be for other teams, which I think is a big secret weapon for them.
And that's what makes them Canada's best team, I think. And there's several reasons, but their depth, their ability to adapt, their coaching, the star power that they have, they are without a doubt, I think, Canada's best MLS team coming into this season. But where do you think they'll finish? Are they enough to be a top 4 in the Western Conference? Because they're going to face some stiff competition. It's going to be, a multi-front season for them. They'll be fighting on multiple fronts, so that makes things difficult. And then I really think that World Cup break will affect a lot of teams, but I do think it's going to affect the host cities a little bit more. Maybe I'm naive to think that, or maybe that's the easy, lazy take, but I do think it's going to affect those teams a little more.
Well, I mentioned earlier, I think they regress slightly in the regular season, but I look at the West and I think they'll be comfortable. I think it's the team to beat. They showed it in CONCACAF Champions Cup. They've showed it on paper. They had an already lethal roster. And, let's just add Stefan Eustáquio. Let's add some other big pieces. But after that, the thing is with the West, Seattle, I think, will be right there. But as we know, Seattle doesn't really care about the Shield. They're just kind of a get in and play in the playoffs kind of team. And you look otherwise, there's a lot of teams that haven't upgraded enough. The LA Galaxy, I think, are going to be better, even though losing Ricky Puig maybe scuppers that a little more because everyone was hoping he would be back. So I'm looking at the rest of the teams. I think the Whitecaps could be right there with LAFC and San Diego, who I think they'll probably be the big three. But the Whitecaps can finish third or fourth, and it won't matter. Whereas conversely, and we'll get to this with Toronto FC and Montreal, the East is such a more balanced 1 to 10 gauntlet, whereas the West right now is kind of tiered where there's the big 3 or 4 with Seattle, LA, Whitecaps, San Diego, and then there's a lot of mushy middle teams that are just trying to scrape into the playoffs because they're in weird places where I think the East is legitimate. Like we saw last year, there's going to be a good team missing the playoffs, where in the West there's going to be some not good teams making the playoffs. So I think the Whitecaps comfortably should push for top 4, and then from there I think their hope is win a major trophy. Like just the fact you were so close to all of them last year, for them they won't care. I think there's an order of priority where I think MLS Cup and Champions Cup are interchangeable, and then Leagues Cup's a distant third, but I think they would prefer that over a Canadian Championship, and of course the Canadian Championship they want to retain, but I think it's just make the playoffs, but then they're going to have their eyes on bigger things, I think, this year.
A 5th straight Canadian Championship feels just expected. A Leagues Cup would be nice, but I agree, a Champions Cup or an MLS Cup. I think MLS Cup matters more. I think
that's what I would say.
It would prove that they are a stronger team than so many give them credit for if they were to be the best team in CONCACAF. But I think for the franchise, I think for those players and this squad as it's assembled now, MLS Cup would mean more, particularly because of the opposition that they would have to go through in the league to win MLS Cup for the very first time, with so much uncertainty surrounding the future of the franchise. MLS Cup would really mean a lot to that city and the club.
Well, just to draw a quick parallel, when the Columbus Crew won in 2020, when they were going through all their off-field, like that was didn't feel like it at the time, but it kind of had a bit of a galvanizing moment. I think the Whitecaps lifting an MLS Cup, especially the narrative of them losing it against the Miami Dynasty a year before, would do wonders for their perception.
There you go. Well, it's Chinese Lunar New Year. It's a fire horse year. So everything's going to accelerate. It's going to be explosive and happen fast. So I love that parallel. There you go. You heard it here on Northern Fútbol. The Vancouver Whitecaps are winning MLS Cup.